The Isle of Man, otherwise known simply as Man, is a self-governing British Crown dependency located in the Irish Sea between the islands of Great Britain and Ireland. The head of state is Queen Elizabeth II, who holds the title of Lord of Man. The Lord of Man is represented by a Lieutenant Governor, but its foreign relations and defence are the responsibility of the British government. The island has been inhabited since before 6500 BC. Gaelic cultural influence began in the 5th century AD, and the Manx language, a branch of the Gaelic languages, gradually emerged. In 627, Edwin of Northumbria conquered the Isle of Man along with most of Mercia. In the 9th century, the Norse began to settle there. Norse people from Scotland then established the Kingdom of the Isles. The king's title would then carry the suffix, and the Isles. Magnus III, the King of Norway, was also known as King of Man and the Isles, as part of the Hebrides civilization between 1099 and 1103. A Norse Gaelic culture arose and the island came under Norse control. In 1266, the island became part of Scotland, as formalized by the Treaty of Perth. After a period of alternating rule by the kings of Scotland and England, the island came under the feudal lordship of the English crown in 1399. The lordship revested into the British crown in 1765. But the island never became part of the Kingdom of Great Britain or its successor the United Kingdom, retaining its status as an internally self-governing crown dependency. Name. The Manx name of the Isle of Man is Ellen Vannin. Ellen is a Manx word meaning island. The earliest recorded Manx form of the name is Manwu or Mana. Manin appears in the genitive case as Vannin, with initial consonant mutation. Hence Ellen Vannin, Island of Man. The Old Irish form of the name is Manor or Mano, also reflected in Man or Gododine, the Welsh name for an ancient district in North Britain along the lower Firth of Forth. The oldest known reference to the island names it Mona. In the 1st century AD, Pliny the Elder records it as Monopia or Monobia, and Ptolemy as Monoidar or Mo-Micron Nu Alpha O Iota Nu Alpha. Later references have Mevania or Manevia, and Eubonia or Eumania by Irish writers. Welsh records it as Manor, and in the sagas of Icelanders it is Mon. The name is probably cognate with the Welsh name of the island of Anglesey, Ynysmon, usually derived from the Celtic word for mountain, from a Proto-Celtic asterisk monius. The name was at least secondarily associated with that of Man Undan in Irish mythology. In the earliest Irish mythological texts, Manannan is a king of the otherworld, but the 9th century Sanus Cormaic identifies a Euhemerise Manannan as a famous merchant who resided in, and gave name to, the Isle of Man. Later, Manannan is recorded as the first king of Man in a Manx poem. History. Rising water levels cut the island off from the surrounding islands around 8000 BC. Evidence suggests that colonization of the island took place by sea sometime before 6500 BC. The first residents lived in small huts, hunting, fishing and gathering their food. They used small tools made of flint or bone, examples of which have been found near the coast. Representatives of these artifacts are kept at the Manx Museum. The Neolithic period marked the coming of knowledge of farming, better stone tools and pottery. It was during this period that megalithic monuments began to appear around the island. Examples from this period can be found at Cashtal Ynard near Mackald, King Ori's grave at Laxey, Meal Circle near Cregnish, and Ballahara stones at St. John's. This was not the only Neolithic culture. There were also the local Ronaldsway and Bank cultures. During the Bronze Age, the large communal tombs of the megalith builders were replaced with smaller burial mounds. Bodies were put in stone-lined graves along with ornamental containers. The Bronze Age burial mounds created long-lasting markers around the countryside. The Iron Age marked the beginning of Celtic cultural influence. Large hill forts appeared on hill summits, and smaller promontory forts along the coastal cliffs, while large timber-framed roundhouses were built. It is likely that the first Celts to inhabit the island were Britons speaking Common Brittonic. Around the 5th century AD, cultural influence from Ireland and migration precipitated a process of Gaelicization evidenced by Ogham inscriptions, giving rise to the Manx language, which is a Goidelic language closely related to Irish and Scottish Gaelic. Viking settlement of the Isle of Man began at the end of the 8th century. The Vikings established Tynwald and introduced many land divisions that still exist. In 1266, King Magnus VI of Norway ceded the islands, including Man, to Scotland in the Treaty of Perth, but Scotland's rule over Man did not become firmly established until 1275, when the Manx suffered defeat in the decisive Battle of Ronaldsway, near Castletown. In 1290, King Edward I of England sent Walter de Huntercombe to take possession of Man, and it remained in English hands until 1313, when Robert Bruce took it after besieging Castle Rushen for 5 weeks. A confused period followed when Man sometimes experienced English rule and sometimes Scottish, until 1346. When the Battle of Neville's Cross decided the long struggle between England and Scotland in England's favour, English rule was delegated to a series of lords and magnates. The Tynwald passed laws concerning the government of the island in all respects and had control over its finances, but was subject to the approval of the Lord of Man. In 1866, the Isle of Man obtained a nominal measure of home rule. Geography. The Isle of Man is located in the middle of the Northern Irish Sea, almost equidistant from England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. It is 52 kilometers long and, at its widest point, 22 kilometers wide. It has an area of around 572 square kilometers. Besides the Island of Man itself, the political unit of the Isle of Man includes some nearby small islands. The seasonally inhabited Calf of Man, Chicken Rock, on which stands an unmanned lighthouse, St. Patrick's Isle and St. Michael's Isle. The last two of these are connected to the main island by permanent roads, causeways. Ranges of hills in the north and south are separated by a central valley. The northern plain, by contrast, is relatively flat, consisting mainly of deposits from glacial advances from western Scotland during colder times. There are more recently deposited shingle beaches at the northernmost point, the Point of Ayr. The island has one mountain higher than 600 meters, Snaefell, with a height of 620 meters. According to an old saying, from the summit one can see 6 kingdoms. Those of Man, Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, and Heaven. Some versions add a 7th kingdom, that of the sea, or Neptune. Population at the 2011 census. The Isle of Man was home to 84,497 people, of whom 27,938 resided in the island's capital, Douglas, and 9,273 in the adjoining village of Onkin. The population rose 5.5% between the 2006 and 2011 censuses. By country of birth, those born in the Isle of Man were the largest group, while those born in the United Kingdom were the next largest group at 42.2%, 1.9% in the Republic of Ireland and 0.2% in the Channel Islands. The remaining 7.5% were born elsewhere in the world, with 2.4% coming from EU countries. The census also reported 1,823 people who claim a knowledge of the Manx language. Census. The Isle of Man full census, last held in 2011, has been a decennial occurrence since 1821, with interim censuses being introduced from 1966. It is separate from, but similar to, the census in the United Kingdom. The 2001 census was conducted by the Economic Affairs Division of the Isle of Man Treasury, under the authority of the Census Act 1929. Climate. The Isle of Man has a temperate oceanic climate. Average rainfall is higher than averaged over the territory of the British Isles. Because the Isle of Man is far enough from Ireland for the prevailing southwesterly winds to accumulate moisture, average rainfall is highest at Snaefell, where it is around 1,900 mm a year. At lower levels it can be around 800 mm a year. The highest recorded temperature was 28.9 degrees Celsius at Ronaldsway on 12 July 1983. Government. The United Kingdom is responsible for the island's defence and ultimately for good governance, and for representing the island in international forums, while the island's own parliament and government have competence over all domestic matters. Structure. The island's parliament, Tynwald, has been in continuous existence since AD 979 or earlier, making it the oldest continuously governing body in the world. Tynwald is a bicameral or tricameral legislature, comprising the House of Keys and the Legislative Council. These two bodies meet together in joint session as Tynwald. The executive branch of government is the Council of Ministers, which is composed of members of Tynwald. It is headed by the Chief Minister, currently Alan Bell MHK. The Council of Ministers comprises the greater part of the House of Keys. Viceregal functions of the head of state are performed by a lieutenant governor. External relations and security defence. Under British law, the Isle of Man is not part of the United Kingdom. However, the UK takes care of its external and defence affairs, and retains paramount power to legislate for the island. There are no independent military forces on the Isle of Man, although HMS Ramsay is affiliated with the town of the same name. From 1938 to 1955 there was the Manx Regiment of the British Territorial Army, which saw extensive action during the Second World War. In 1779, the Manx Fencible Corps, a fencible regiment of 3 companies, was raised. It was disbanded in 1783 at the end of the American War of Independence. Later, the Royal Manx Fencibles was raised at the time of the French Revolutionary Wars and Napoleonic Wars. The 1st Battalion was raised in 1793. A 2nd Battalion was raised in 1795, and it saw action during the Irish Rebellion of 1798. The regiment was disbanded in 1802. A 3rd body of Manx Fencibles was raised in 1803 to defend the island during the Napoleonic Wars and to assist the revenue. It was disbanded in 1811. Emergency services. The Isle of Man government maintains 5 emergency services. These are Isle of Man Constabulary, Isle of Man Coast Guard, Isle of Man Fire and Rescue Service, Isle of Man Ambulance Service, Isle of Man Civil Defence Corps. All of these services are controlled directly by the Isle of Man government, and are independent of the United Kingdom. Nonetheless, the Isle of Man Constabulary voluntarily submits to inspection by the British Inspectorate of Police, and the Isle of Man Coast Guard contracts Her Majesty's Coast Guard for air-sea rescue operations. Citizenship in the Isle of Man is governed by British law. Passports issued by the Isle of Man Passport Office say British Islands, Isle of Man, on the cover, but the nationality status stated on the passport is simply British citizen. Although Manx passport holders are British citizens, because the Isle of Man is not part of the European Union. People born on the island without a parent or grandparent, either born or resident for more than 5 consecutive years in the United Kingdom, do not have the same rights as other British citizens with regard to employment and establishment in the EU. Isle of Man passports can be issued to any British citizen in the Isle of Man. They can also be issued to Manx-connected British citizens residing in Britain or either of the other Crown dependencies. European Union. The Isle of Man holds neither membership nor associate membership of the European Union. Protocol 3 of the UK's active accession to the Treaty of Rome included the Isle of Man within the EU's customs area, allowing for the trade for Manx goods without tariffs throughout the EU. However, there are still limitations on the movement of capital and services. EU citizens are entitled to travel and reside, but not work, in the island without restriction, and Manx citizens, without the hereditary qualification outlined above, are similarly restricted from working in the EU. Commonwealth of Nations. The Isle of Man is not itself a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. By virtue of its relationship with the United Kingdom, it takes part in several Commonwealth institutions, including the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and the Commonwealth Games. The government of the Isle of Man has made calls for a more integrated relationship with the Commonwealth, including more direct representation and enhanced participation in Commonwealth organisations and meetings, including Commonwealth heads of government meetings. The Chief Minister of the Isle of Man has said, a closer connection with the Commonwealth itself would be a welcome further development of the island's international relationships. Politics. Most Manx politicians stand for election as independents rather than as representatives of political parties. Though political parties do exist, their influence is not nearly as strong as in the United Kingdom. There are two political parties in the Isle of Man. The Liberal Vannin Party with 2 seats in the House of Keys. They promote greater Manx independence and more accountability in government. The Manx Labour Party is the other. They hold 1 seat. A number of pressure groups also exist on the island. MEC Vannin advocate the establishment of a sovereign republic. The Positive Action Group campaign for 3 key elements to be introduced into the governance of the island: open accountable government, rigorous control of public finances, and a fairer society. Local government on the Isle of Man is based partly on the island's 17 ancient parishes. There are 2 types of local authorities: a corporation for the borough of Douglas, and bodies of commissioners for the town districts of Castletown, Peel and Ramsey. The village districts of Kirkmichael, Laxey, Onchan, Port Erin and Port St Mary, and the 15 parish districts. Local authorities are under the supervision of the Isle of Man Government's Department of Local Government and the Environment. Demographics. Education. Public education is under the Department of Education and Children. 34 primary schools, 5 secondary schools, and the Isle of Man College function under the department.